Inpatient physical therapy is located on the third floor at the Knott Street campus in Schenectady, New York, at Ellis Medicine. The purpose of this department is to assess patients and their entire body to see if they are allowed to be discharged, whether they're allowed to go home and they can care for themselves, or if they need to go to a rehab facility where they will get further physical education, as well as will get assistance in everyday tasks such as going to the bathroom and getting up to go for a walk. Jobs that are associated in inpatient physical therapy are physical therapists and occupational therapists. Departments that work with this is mainly neuroscience, because many of the patients have neurological deficits that need help regaining back their motor functions. The difference between inpatient physical therapy and outpatient physical therapy is that inpatient, they're deciding whether they can go home. It's mainly discharge planning, whether it be rehab or back to the patient's house itself. Many of the patients are not stable, and they need to look at the vitals as well as the physical and motor functions. They don't look at one specific area. They look at the whole body to make sure that it's all functioning properly. And outpatient is mainly focused on one part. So if they had shoulder surgery, they focus on the shoulder. But inpatient, they focus they just focus on the whole body itself. In my rotation, I spent the time in the neuroscience ICU. And that's where they spend most of their time, because many of their patients need help with their motor functions after suffering a neurological deficit. They have rounds at 9:30 to check up on all the patients. This usually lasts about 45 minutes. I was unfortunately only able to see one patient, but I was able to understand the process in which the physical therapists and occupational therapists go through to see whether they can send a patient home or if they have to send them to rehabilitation. So the first patient had an infection in his spine, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. He's very independent. He is able to live at home mainly on his own. He does have a caretaker that comes in once a week. They wanted to see his movement, so they asked him to move back and forth and get up and put socks on. They felt a lot of tension in his legs, and which he also felt at the same time. The physical therapist and occupational therapist work together in just making this decision in whether the patient can go home or be sent to a rehab facility. They had the patient scoot to the left and scoot to the right to mimic getting out of bed and sitting down. It was hard for the patient to move because he was very weak from just laying in bed most of the time and not being able to really follow his routine throughout the day. He used a trapeze, which is a string hanging and like a triangle or grip hanging from his ceiling to help him get out of bed and help lift himself. He was able to reach his feet, and he has a very strict routine that he would follow at home for getting out of bed and getting ready in the morning. They really want to make sure that the patient's comfortable, and they don't want to send him home and have him struggle, or they don't want to send him to a rehab facility and him not need it. So they really had thorough examinations to make sure that the patient was comfortable. That was everything that was going on. And at the end of the visit, they decided to send the patient to rehab at Sunnyview to gain back a lot of the motor functions that he lost while laying in bed and make him stronger so he can perform a lot of the daily tasks that he would on his own before he got the infection in his spine. When I asked my preceptors what advancements have been made in the inpatient physical therapy department, they told me that rounding with the patients has something that was just added into the program. Rounding with the patient includes going into the room during rounds to meet the patient, and the whole team meets the patient, and to be able to really get a better understanding of the patient's diagnosis and treatment, and possibly even the prognosis and just their day-to-day, how they're doing. In order to become a physical therapist, you must have a bachelor's degree, which will be obtained by maintaining a high GPA in college. Many colleges offer physical therapy programs such that you can go to college for 5 years instead of 4, and you can walk out with your master's, or you can go for 3 years after obtaining your bachelor's, and you can get what is equivalent to a doctorate degree. It is mandatory that all physical therapists have a state license. Many employers prefer it, as well as many states require it. In order to continue on education, they can get board certified as a physical therapist by taking the board certification examination. In order to become an occupational therapist, you can do a dual degree with a bachelor's and master's, which is offered through your 4-year school that you will be attending. There is no specific major you need to take, but it's ideal that you take a medical-based major. It is required that you have your master's degree, and to get that, you must work 24 weeks in the field to get first-hand experience. You also must be licensed based on what your state requires. And in order to continue education, you can get board certified by in occupational therapy, which will make you more idealistic to employers. Physical therapists have an annual salary of $88,880, and their projected job outlook is a 22% increase between the years of 2018 and 2028. An occupational therapist salary is $84,270 per year, and they have an 18% increase for projected job outlook between the years of 2018 and 2028. And government jobs that are available for both these therapists are to work with veterans that have been injured in war, because many come back with injuries and need to be properly assessed and discharged to see if they need to go to rehabilitation or if they can go back home, and many are going to need follow-up appointments that will require them to gain their muscle strength back. The self-connections I made were to many of my previous rotations that I had that pertained to the inpatient physical therapy. The first connection I made was to my neuroscience rotation when we went on the rounds in my inpatient physical therapy. One of the neurologists talked about TPA, which reminded me when I was sitting in on a board meeting, sort of, on my neuroscience rotation where they talked about TPA and how it relates to strokes. It also reminded me of my outpatient physical therapy rotation because they use the same method of working with their patients, which is called PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. The text connections I made to this rotation was to the movie we watched, Whose Life Is It Anyway, because the physical therapist and occupational therapist I was shadowing had very good bedside manner, which they did in the movie to help the patient adapt, because he was a quadriplegic who really needed help from his nurses and everything, and that's what these patients needed as well, because they were recovering, especially the one I saw from a spinal injury where he was paralyzed. So it really helped me connect the movie and this real life scenario. The world connection I made is that a lot of the baby boomers in this population are now needing surgeries to get them back in that better health, and will need to maybe be a part of, or maybe need to meet with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist to see if they could get discharged from the hospital, and whether they need to go to rehab or they're allowed to go home because their motor skills aren't as well as the youth population. For my inpatient physical therapy rotation, my reading material that was recommended to me was the American Physical Therapy Association website. This website is full of great and thorough information on physical therapy itself. You can see career opportunities, you can read articles published by physical therapists. There's sections for the public to read. There's also student applications available for physical therapy programs. There's opportunities to find a physical therapist in your area, as well as you can join this association through this website. And you could create a profile and do all these different aids to help with the association itself. I enjoyed my inpatient physical therapy rotation because it surrounded me with a very positive environment, and I really liked my preceptors, and they were very nice and welcoming of me. I also liked the way they interacted with patients to make sure that they found the very best way to make sure that this patient had a good recovery and wouldn't have any further complications. I would not consider having a job in this field just because I want to be a respiratory therapist. And although I would like my environment to be as positive as this one was,